Hey, Algebra 1, we're going to look at absolute value functions. They are kind of a piecewise function in that they take where two lines kind of intersect. However, we don't have to do the two parts separately because there's an absolute value symbol on your graphing calculator, so it works really easy. Okay, first of all, we are going to need to change our window because remember when we did those step functions, we usually use quadrant 1. So if I go to zoom 6, that gives me my standard window back. Okay? Now, absolute value function, there are two places to find it. Remember, we found it in the math menu. If you arrow over 1 to NUM, that's number 1. But I can also do alpha F2. And see, that's my first step. Okay? Okay, so let's quit that for a minute because I want to look at the parent function. So if I go to my y equals alpha F2 absolute value of x. Now see that little arrow says, hey, get out of that absolute value. And if I graph it, okay, that's my parent function. Notice its bounce point or its vertex is at the origin, okay? And this is your basic absolute value function. It's a V-shaped, okay? The guided practice, the example and the guided practice are designed to kind of hopefully help you see how some different things will change that graph. So in looking at example 4, okay, example 4 says f of x equals the absolute value of 2x and absolute value minus 4. So I want to do alpha f2, number 1, 2x, arrow out because that minus 4 is outside of my absolute value bars, and I hit graph. Okay, so hopefully you can see that it had a balance point, but it just moved down. Because remember when we talked about graphing, we talked about functions in Algebra 1, we said, hey, this minus 4 just kind of moves it down 1. Notice that 2 changes my slope, okay? So when I go to graph it on a MathBits graph, my y-intercept is -4, 2 is my slope, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, and that kind of checks because my x-intercept was 2, okay? So I take my handy-dandy ruler and graph my line, okay? Now the other side is the mirror image. So instead of having a slope of 2, it's got a negative slope of -2, okay? But it is a mirror image. Okay? Only things you've got to remember, so see this 2 is like a slope, this moved it down 4. The domain is going to be all real numbers. The range has to do with that bounce point, okay? The range has to do with y is greater than or equal to -4, okay? So the guided practice are to help you see how changing things will change what the graph looks like, okay? So if I look at guided practice A, let's clear this one, alpha F2, absolute value, x minus 2 inside my absolute value, and notice what difference that makes. Okay, instead of moving it down, because it was -2, it moved it to the right 2. Slope of the sides is still 1, it's just my balance point has changed, and it's moved it. Okay, and it still has a slope of 1. The other half has a slope of -1. So it's really easy to get those points to draw your graph. Domain would be all real numbers. The range would be that y is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, now the next guided practice says we want we want negative, okay, absolute value of x, no numbers inside, plus 1. What do you think is going to happen? Any ideas? Okay, well, you can look at the graph and tell. Ooh, that negative flipped it or reflected it, and that plus 1 moved it up. Okay, slope is still 1. Okay, but my bounce point is here, and it's going downwards instead of upwards. Okay. Still has a mirror image. Domain is still all real numbers. My range, however, would be that y is less than or equal to 1. Because all my y's are less than 1 except for this one, which equals 1. Okay? Hope that helps with absolute values.